Hello and welcome back around the bonfire. Pleasure to have you all in on what is a slightly disappointing match day +1 here. We're back to talk a little bit of Chicago Fire football. I'm joined by, some of the greats, we'll say there. I'm joined first and foremost by Tim, our writer, and maybe the smartest guy in the room. Tim, how are you feeling this morning?
If I'm the smartest guy in the room, we are not in a great place as a group. So I hope that that's not true, but we'll just try soldiering on together.
All right. Next week, I'll be nice to somebody else. But for right now, we've got not the smartest guy in the room, Matt. Matt, how are we feeling?
It's true. I'm definitely not the smartest guy in the room, but I will say that if Tim is the smartest guy in the room, I'm very confident in that space and in his leadership. And I just wanted to let you know that, Tim. But I'm happy to be here. Yeah, he's giving me a hard on camera right now. Love you too, man. Good to see you guys.
There we go. Alan, now it's your turn to say something nice about Tim, but we're here with a man with the saxophone, the pole with the goal, and the man repping the Chicago Hounds today. Alan, how are we feeling, dog?
I'm still feeling like I need to dry myself off after that absolute rain, the amount of rain that fell yesterday, and I have no compliments for Tim, honestly.
Ouch. By the way, he's not just repping the Hounds. It looks like he was like contemplating playing for them because he was sitting down with the Hounds jersey on as well as a rugby ball in his hands. So he's ready. He's ready for at least some minutes off the bench, but possibly a start.
Put me in the scrum, coach.
Yeah, I know the Hounds.
You look like a hooker to me, Alan. That's a rugby joke.
Yeah, thank you.
Look, I know the Hounds haven't been great in these first couple of years, but I've met some of those guys. Shout out Brad Tucker. Alan, I love you, but I don't think you would quite be up to snuff just physically. Maybe hit the gym a little bit. But anywho, wonderful to be back, even though the result was not exactly what we had hoped. A few quick lineup notes going into last night against Montreal. No changes from last week. First time since going against San Jose last year. So obviously a lot of turnover, I suppose. Brian Gutierrez, Kellen Acosta still not fit enough to be selected for this match, unfortunately. Diego Conix did see the bench again, but did not appear in the game. In terms of actual game recap, kind of not the most exciting of events, and candidly not the cleanest of events either. Things started off a little sloppy on the field, and then he got just even more so, as Alan mentioned before. Pretty strong rain and winds kind of carried the rest of the night and put a damper on the evening for both sides. We saw Mauricio Pineda put a nice shot on goal that was tipped away by the Montreal keeper, whose name is very French, but I can't remember it off the top of my head, unfortunately. Sirois. Yeah, there we go. Wonderful shot on goal there. And then we had late in the first half, actually a really beautiful play from Zinkernagel on an inbounds throw, sending it over to Bamba, who put it over his head onto Andrew Gutman's foot. He then took it in, passed it back to Zinkernagel for a nice goal from the top of the 6-yard box. We saw Christopher Brady showing you why he is every bit of a great 21-year-old goalkeeper throughout the game, making some incredible saves, and then also making some poor decisions that led to some incredible saves when he came all the way out of the box, was chipped by Owusu, and then came back in to clear it away. Unfortunately,
that's why
Montreal,
he's 21 years old, right? Like when I was 21, I was making worse decisions than Chris Brady's making. I did not have tens of thousands of people watching me in a stadium and online on Apple TV as I was making those bad decisions. So, here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. We all did bad things at 21. Some of us didn't recover the way he did, though. So credit to him on that one. And then finally, in the second half, Seeley finds himself unmarked on the right side of the box, put one past Brady to equalize, and that was really all she wrote. Fire did look like they threatened a little bit towards the end of the second half, but nothing too serious, unfortunately. Nothing that could get across the line. And guys, we all kind of came into this game off of a 3-game road winning trip against bottom of the barrel Montreal. And last week, the thoughts coming into this was very much, this is a game you want to win. This is a game you need to win. It's a game you should win. And now we've seen the Fire kind of play down to their opponent, kind of played off the field last night. And Tim, I'll toss to you just the general vibes around what this result, or almost lack of a result, right, means to the team.
Yeah, it's sort of weird, right? Because like the team is still on a 5-game undefeated streak. Like their only loss is that season opener in Columbus. And despite that, in the locker room afterwards, like it was guys that weren't chatting a lot with each other. They were staring at the ground, staring at their shoes, both like just getting out. There was like perfunctory goodbyes and I'm going to jet out. Like nobody was really in a mood to hang out or chill. And when players were talking to us, it was a lot of like, not really making eye contact with us. And that's a big change from the way that things were in previous seasons. So I think that in a way is the positive, that despite being undefeated at home, right, like 2 points in two matches, it doesn't feel good enough. And I don't think anyone was that happy with it, including Greg Berhalter, who said that he was just disappointed with the way that his team came out in this one.
Yeah, I think that's 2 home results where, I think we look back to the beginning of the season, you say, hey, in your first 6 matches, you're going to end up with 11 points. That sounds great. And, by all accounts, it is, right? You do like to have, certainly the standings we do, I think still 4th in the East right now. But realistically, both home games feel like 2 points lost as opposed to 4 points lost, as opposed to 2 points gained. Matt, Alan, I know we were both there last night. Matt, I'll toss to you kind of general thoughts watching it back this morning, walking out of the stadium, feeling the way that game ended.
Yeah, it's a good question because although I haven't seen a Fire win at Soldier Field since 2023, which is a disgustingly true fact, this tie felt a little different to me compared to the last 2 seasons. And yes, we tied, and yes, it was a bad feeling, but I didn't feel incredibly deflated like this was the only point we're going to get in the last month, or we've already got in the last month. So that was refreshing. But at the end of the day, I have very openly expressed that this should have been a win. The Fire are both on the field and on paper a better team in terms of quality. But Montreal came into Soldier Field, played a really competitive game, and we played down to their style, to their level, and it showed in the final result. So overall, it is disappointing, especially because, and I'm sure we'll touch on it eventually, you go into a really difficult stretch of probably 5-6 games against top Eastern Conference and Western Conference opponents. It's a game that you should have picked up 3 points, and I just hope that when we are, in September and October chasing playoffs, hopefully, that this isn't one of those 2-point scenarios that's really going to cost you, the difference between 8th place and 6th place. But that being said,
Matt, has it occurred to you that maybe you're the problem with the
No,
the
it
Fire
definitely
at home?
has. And I say that all the time. Now, will that stop me from going to games? Absolutely not. I love games. I love the vibes. I love the people. But yeah, I'm the problem. They're just going to have to get over that because I'm not stopping, Tim. I'm not stopping. They're going to have to figure it out.
Yeah, I don't think it's you though, to be honest. Like Alan, what were your impressions while you were there?
For me, it was, well, first of all, I was very much focused a lot on maintaining that supporter section vibes. Me, and then shout out to Jesse and Danny on trumpet, who, with our powers combined, we were helping to lead the supporters sections, both Section A and Sector Latino. So it was, the vibes were there even after the rain. But yeah, it was just frustrating to see, because I said this in the episode after we beat, who was it? Vancouver, after we beat Vancouver, that, we all were like, yeah, this is Montreal. They're bottom of the barrel. They just fired their head coach and we should win easily. And I'm like, hold on a second, because something's going to happen. And unfortunately, that something did happen. So I was very much, because of it, focused more on just making sure that the supporters section is bumping and that people are having fun nonetheless, even with the rain. Which,
yeah, and like on that, I think that's kind of a similar vibe. Like Berhalter after the game said that, he told the group when they met afterwards, like he said, we'll take the point and run because we don't deserve a point. That's for sure. Like that's the quote that we got from him. And, it's unfortunate. And like, I don't think that anybody really had a game that they want. Like, I think that Brady, he had the most saves that he had since last year against Inter Miami and the game in Fort Lauderdale when he had 7, he had 6, I believe, last night. And, despite that, it didn't feel like a good game because of that, nerviness in like the 58th minute when he was playing well off his line. And he had some other nervy moments. Like nobody really had a game that I think they can really be proud of and say like, that's one that I did everything I could.
Yeah, I think there's this is a Chicago Fire podcast, right? I think that's important to get out there. We all know, but we do quick shout out, right? That Montreal team looked significantly better, and credit to Marco Donadell, excuse me, Marco Donadell for kind of exposing some areas that were ripe to be taken, right? That Vancouver couldn't get to. There was certainly a goal from this team last night, and I'll kind of as we talk like. Generally speaking, not the game anybody wanted to have. Tim, I'll toss to you because we talked about this on the preview a little bit of like tactically. I don't know that was the game Greg Berhalter wanted to have either, right? We've seen Sam Williams play better than he did last night. It felt like the midfield kind of left the defense hanging a little bit on that last goal. Would love to hear if you guys felt similarly, or if I'm the only one barking up that tree.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at what Montreal actually did, because they won, it's one of those things where if you look at a stat sheet, you don't actually see the game that was played, right? Because Montreal had, around 60% of the ball, a little bit less than that, which is a pretty substantial, amount of possession. But the way they were actually playing was they were willing to sit back. They would get like 5 defenders in the box. They would man mark when they didn't have the ball, and just to make life difficult for the Fire physically. And then they were a quick counter team. And like that's how that goal happened. It's a very quick build out from the back, ball over the top, pings off a midfielder to someone running at the top of the box into the box. They've got numbers, and then boom in the back of the net, right? And that's, I think, a style of play that the Fire have not played as well against this season. It was the same kind of style that DC played. And it's also not what Vancouver played. Like Vancouver wanted to play a game closer to the one that the Fire did, where it's building out of the back and stuff like that. The thing that struck me is like the Fire, when they would get the ball, like, a recovery or something like that, say Brady gets the ball, he'd play it to a center back. And sometimes it would be like typically like Elliott, I think, is the guy that they're trusting to do the build out part more. And it's just kind of like stand on the ball waiting for Montreal to come and attack him, so that they would then kind of have numbers somewhere. Because if you've got guys coming at you, then they're not somewhere else deeper in the pitch. And Montreal were more than happy to just like stand back and they would have let Elliott have that ball all day, as long as he wasn't playing it forward. And I don't think the Fire really had an answer for that. Like they were not able to make that switch themselves and kind of do that more direct, quick attacking, which is a club you've got to have in your bag, no matter what.
And I want to jump on that and start off by saying that I'm a true believer in the interim coach bump. That first game after an interim coach gets the job, for some reason, they always have their teams ready. I believe, and I'm saying this with my chest, Frank Klopas was in that position when he won his first game in his second stint of being interim coach for the Fire, after probably Ezra is his second stint, if I remember correctly. But the reason I say that is like John and Tim have alluded to, I almost forgot Tim's name. I'm sorry, I don't know why. The Marco had his boys ready to play. He played a system that was difficult for our defense and our midfield to navigate, and that really, really showed in pretty much all 90 minutes. I was really accustomed to these past 4 games to clean passing between the defense, midfield, and that final third pass over to Zink and Bamba, and it was really, really poor. And part of that could be related to the second half weather. Of course, water does not help you pass the ball cleanly. It makes the game choppier. But everyone from Sam Williams down to Gutman, and yes, Gutman and Barroso, and even Bamba and Zinkernagel, guys that are normally very reliable in terms of their distribution, really struggled. And I believe that's because what Tim mentioned, and that's the defensive setup of Montreal really prevented them from playing their fluid 1-2s. They like to play with their midfield trios and stuff like that. So it's really interesting. It's really interesting to see an interim coach come in there and just get it right and compete and go into a really, really hot team and play that sort of defensive style and prevent a really, really hot attack in Zink and Hugo and Bamba largely. I know, the Fire still scored, and kudos to them.
I think that traces back a little bit to where we started, right? There was a bit of watching this game that felt a little bit of a vibe shift from the team of, now we're going to go out and earn these 3 points, because we talked about a little bit beforehand, like they got out physicaled a little bit. They got pushed off the ball a bit. And that was something we talked about in the preview of Montreal haven't done the best job in that to this point. And the Fire have been an exceptionally kind of edgy, physical team, winning those balls, playing strong in. And so I kind of did have a thought of like, man, how much this is, we're shifting a mindset from we're earning our points tonight to, okay, let's just get these 3 points in front of the home crowd and go home. How much of that could be a little bit of complacency? And it's a little insane to say 6 weeks into a season, right? But 3 wins on the road, you certainly earn a little bit of that.
I asked Berhalter about that because he said his concern when he was asked on Thursday about overconfidence being an issue. He said he wasn't concerned about overconfidence. He was concerned about complacency. And so I asked him after the game whether he thought it was some complacency setting in. And what he said was, I was worried about complacency. This is a direct quote, but I don't think complacency was the issue in this game. I really think it was about embracing what type of game it was going to be. And we did a poor job of that. It was going to be very physical, very little space because they are man-to-man marking. And we're going to have guys that are brave and wanted to embrace that battle. And unfortunately today, we lack that a little bit. And some of that, let's put this in perspective a little bit. Sam Piette and Sergio Orahel are theoretically two midfielders playing a similar position, and they would, be playing against each other in similar battles. I am not taking Sergio Orahel in a physical battle ever against Sam Piette because they do not look like they are remotely built the same kind of way. Sam Piette looks like he's a rugby player that managed to learn how to play soccer, and Sergio Orahel looks like a guy that is still a teenager adding muscle, and he added a lot in the offseason, and credit that he's getting bigger, stronger, and faster, and that's all great, but he's not going to be the guys that will win those battles. He did win a header against Bryce Duke, which I was like, cool, Sergio. I didn't know you had this in you, because I don't know how much taller Bryce Duke is than Sergio Orahel, but in my mind, he's 6 inches taller. I know that's not accurate, but just with the way that Duke carries himself and his overall build and stuff like that. So, it's not that Sergio was having a bad game. I actually thought he had a relatively good game if we're ranking players from best to worst performance on the team. It just isn't the game that we needed from him to see the Fire win.
Bryce Duke is listed at 5'7". Sergio Orahel is listed at 5'9".
He's your favorite player too, John, I heard, right? You love Bryce Duke.
Hey, credit to Bryce Duke. He, his team overperformed last night.
Sam Piette slander. Oh, can't take it.
No, yeah. Well, and I think last night was also kind of an interesting aspect of, I think some of the cracks are starting to show in this midfield, and a ton of credit to Sergio Orahel. I think he's been fantastic. I thought he was the best midfielder last night. Mauricio Pineda, I think we're all in agreement on who Maury is as a player, which is a good guy. We'd prefer him to come off the bench as opposed to be starting, but he's performed well enough in these kind of spot start duties he's had recently. I do think it's a little bit of a pair of Greg's tactics and Sam Williams as a player, of a guy who is 19 years old, still developing, who we have high hopes for now, but didn't at the beginning of the season. That you're starting to see that those cracks in the midfield form, I think, right? How different does that game go if you have a Kellen Acosta, a Brian Gutierrez, maybe a fully healthy Romani Kouame playing for 70, 80 minutes last night? I think that's a big part of, you're playing against a man-marking system. You need to be able to play the ball quickly, confidently, and find space. I think that plays into it quite a bit.
I honestly think that part of it, though, is the team was trying to do too much playing through the midfield, as opposed to have a guy one of the fullbacks maybe, or something else, maybe take the ball at the pitch a little bit and then ping a long distance switch pass to somebody. The Fire tried that a couple of times and it almost never worked because they weren't winning those second balls. And we saw that, Brady was launching balls. I think he was reasonably accurate with his service in that game. And the Fire were just not getting on the ends of those balls. It would all, the vast majority of the time, it would end up being Montreal that was then playing the ball after that, because the Fire were either late getting there, or more often, they just weren't able to really recover quickly enough and press the case to Montreal.
Yeah, certainly. And I think there's apologies. Yeah. And so just kind of looking back at the numbers here, and I had this written down. I think it's important to talk about as you talk about the kind of similarities between this game and the DC game. There are only 2 games in this year in which the Fire have had less than 360 completed passes and less than an 80% completion rate on passes. And that was DC and last night against Montreal. They were sitting firmly above that 83% mark in the last 3 games that they won on the road. So certainly, just in looking in the amount of passes and the way they were playing towards the second half, it did seem like they were trying to push the ball a bit more direct. Obviously, just didn't quite work out that way, at least in terms of creating opportunities. Yeah. And there is an aspect of, and sorry, Matt, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I'm glad you said that. I'm looking at the momentum chart on FootMob, and one thing I'm thinking a lot about, specifically about this game and a greater theme of the season so far is, yes, we've had success, but the first 15 minutes of every match have largely been the other team just inviting themselves into our box, and we're not really touching the ball or making any passes more than 2 or clearing the ball until like the 15th minute, and that was reflected in this Montreal game. Another slow start, which is something that against a team like Montreal, where you are expected to win, where you are the minus 175 favorite on all of the books, like you're expected to set that pace early, and that's something we failed to do. And it seems like based off the stats and what I could recollect, that was the same with DC as too, is those slow starts where you allow these teams who do not have as good of talent to settle into the game within the first 5-10 minutes. And then all of a sudden, the rest of the second half, you're fighting to get that momentum and that leverage back. And obviously, we scored by the end of the first half when we were a significantly worse team, and that's because we do have that attacking talent. And Bamba, Gutman, and Zink, created a great trio to get that goal in the net. But it's concerning to me, and the main concern is as we go into this stretch with the Miamis and Cincy's, and I think Atlanta and Charlotte and New York Red Bulls next week, that sort of slow start is going to cost us those early goals like we saw against Columbus. And it's just a theme that I'm hoping doesn't continue as we move on.
Yeah, and I think that's especially true because like we've talked about the absences in the midfield and stuff like that, but that also means that like your depth pieces are on the pitch at the start. And, like I realized that Bamba was, he's been playing almost 90 minutes every single match and he's kind of looked good in stretches, but like he wasn't getting activated early in that match. You've got Zinkernagel, I think, did a better job kind of making a case early and he got the goal, but like the Fire didn't register a shot until I want to say like the 18th or 19th minute. And that's just kind of too late. Like it now, like obviously if you've got a choice of either taking minutes 1 to 15 or like 1 to like 25 or whatever, like the Fire had against Columbus, or the rest of the match, you take the rest of the match. But I mean, you need both, right?
Yeah, Tim, important note as you talk about like not registering a shot until the 17th, 18th minute. Last night, total shots, Chicago Fire 6, shots on target for Montreal 7, right? And that's kind of the story of this game here. And that's why a little bit when you talk about like there was no effort to go more direct or not enough of an effort, we'll say. 2 corners last night for Chicago, right? So there wasn't really any threat. And you look at that single goal, right? It was great play. It was 3 or 4 great individual moments that linked up together to put Philip Zinkernagel in exactly where he wants to be to score. But even then, it was an inbounds throw that was quite a haul. Zinkernagel made a great play on the ball. Bamba has a perfect flick over his head right to Gutman's feet. So many things had to line up
on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So many things had to line up for that goal to happen. I mean, and Greg said it well in the post game, right? Of like, we were lucky to get a point. Because as great of a play as that is 5 great plays all connected to make 1 good goal that saved you 2 points or a point.
Honestly, like I think that like that is not unusual. Like everything has to go right to get a goal most of the time, unless somebody else the other team makes a mistake. And so I think that is sort of okay. Like that was sort of the archetypical goal that you'd expect from like a Berhalter team with the way that it worked out. But you're right. Like it's just that we didn't see enough of that, right? Like that was an incredibly skilled move by Bamba. How many other incredibly skilled moves did we see from him in that match? Like it wasn't a lot. It seemed like he was fairly anonymous. Kuipers had 14 passes in the entire game, barely got any service in the box whatsoever,
I will say on the topic of Bamba, and although I agree with you, Tim, he was largely not a part of the game besides that wonderful flick, which I saw and I'm like, I'd probably pull a muscle if I did that in any capacity. That being said, I do believe he should have registered a goal. And it goes back to what you mentioned about not involving Hugo. The one time he was involved, or one of the few times he was involved in the second half, I want to say it was probably around the 60th-ish minute, he got the ball close to the top of the six, top in between the 18 and the six, or probably top of the 18, honestly, took a shot as opposed to slotting it right down to Bombo, who probably, knowing the quality of player that he is, would have slotted that into the back corner. And to me, that was disappointing because Hugo hadn't touched the ball at all. Like Tim said, 14 passes at all. But you also expect your star nine to have slightly better decision making there. I don't think I mentioned that when Hugo did shoot it, it went all the way into the supporter section, sky high, when in reality, we possibly could have taken the league. So although it wasn't largely... Go ahead, Tim.
Just like on that, like, I mean, by that point, like the rain had been coming down, like the pitch was a lot slicker and the ball was a lot slicker. So I think that, like, again, like he would have had a better feel for the ball if he had been engaged more. And like, I don't mean to be calling out Bomba or Kuipers about this, right? Like, I don't think it's individual performances from them. It's that if the Fire are going to score 3 or 4 goals in a game, you'd expect at least a couple of them to come from those two guys. And so if they are not getting the service and they are not getting the chances, it's a team problem. It's not that a lack of effort or performance from them individually.
And, I feel like I've been kind of the person the last couple of weeks who has given a lot of credit to Greg Berhalter and the way the system has looked and how he's put the team in really good positions. And this is where I mentioned it earlier, but I'd like to kind of throw back and think a little bit more about preparation wise, right? Coming into this game, Tim, you talked about kind of a lack of going direct. I think there were times where, we talked about Jack Elliott kind of just sitting with the ball at his feet, welcoming in that press to try to create space to break the press. There were so many times during this game where that was the play, and then he just hoof it long. And it's, hey, man, Bomba's still marked, Kuiper's still marked. You're not really finding an open spot there. And that is where a little bit kind of watching this game, there was some thought of, what was the tactical preparation here? How did that really set these guys up? Because they looked pressed. They looked confused. They looked, like they didn't know where to go at times.
There was one point in the game, I don't remember who I made the comment to, but I go, why does it look like we're playing Frank Klopas offense right now? And that goes back to the playing the long ball and your attackers are simply marked by bigger guys and aren't going to win those balls. It just felt like something that we had not seen yet, something that concerned me because it reminded me of our toxic past and something I hope doesn't continue. And I hope what Tim's smiling, he liked that one. That makes me happy. And it's something I hope doesn't continue and was just a onset of panicking a little bit because Montreal was actually overperforming than what they were accustomed to.
Well, they were just fighting more, right? Montreal were. And I think that's a big part of it. Like, that's why there wasn't that pass available because Montreal were content to sit and man mark and they were just like glue on guys, right? Like it was nonstop. They did not give up the physical battles in the entire 90 minutes and they just outworked them, right? And like that, I think in the end was the biggest difference is they pushed for it more. They were more physical. They stuck to their defensive plan. And the Fire's, I think, game plan wasn't altogether a bad one necessarily. I think that it was the right, like the tactics and stuff could have worked, but they just had to work to make those things work. And they had to realize the situation that they were in of like, okay, this guy is sticking to me like glue. So I need to come up with some way of generating some separation or something like that to get something to be an option. We just didn't see enough of that. Although one thing I do want to shout out really quick, we talked about the goal that the Fire scored, just how good of a pass that was from Andrew Gutman, the cross into the box. Like he had to thread that thing perfectly. Asking him about it after the game, he said that like it's because he was a defender that he thinks he was able to make that pass because he said, when you're defending, your tendency is to want to do that extra step. And that means that your legs are kind of like spread out a little bit. And he kind of thought, all right, that's what's going to happen here. It is what happened. And then he shot the pass between the Montreal defender. I'm blanking on who it is at the moment, between his between his legs, and then that is what.
It was Joel Waterman, actually, Tim.
I think it was Waterman.
Yeah,
Waterman was supposed to be marking Zink. I think it was somebody else.
Right, but so he did a good job, one, pulling him off from that and making that run that sort of like destabilized the defense a little bit. But that pass, I think, was just like it's the kind of thing that we didn't see from him enough last year because he wasn't playing consistently, and it's the kind of thing that the Fire really. I mean, any team really can use a guy that can do that. Wasn't a perfect game for Gutman either, right? Like, I think that he was slow getting back. I think that he's not as fast as he thinks he is sometimes, and that's kind of what earned him that yellow card. But, going forward, I think he did show a lot of what he can do.
Yeah, I mean, I've commonly said this, that when healthy, Andrew Gutman is one of the better attacking fullbacks in Major League Soccer. And you could see that, especially when he's lined up next to a guy named Bamba. His distribution into the box has always been good. And what he's lacked is that defensive one-on-one capability, like Tim mentioned. I think it benefits from having a rock hard center back like a Jack Elliott or Sam Rogers next to you. But being exposed on that left back position is, of course, not valuable. Kind of the opposite of what I see with Leo Barroso on the right side. So just an interesting dynamic to have those two fullbacks lined up next to each other, or in the same back line, rather.
Yeah, and I think that Barroso was given instructions to stay a little bit further back in this one. I think he was getting a little bit too far forward.
Yep.
Again, like he had some good moments. Like there were some times that he was able to play out through pressure pretty well. I still think that he's obviously just so young, right? And I think he's so skilled that it's easy to forget how young he is and how he's still like not just learning the league, because like that's something that's happening to like Zinkernagel and Bamba, but like just learning the pace of like a professional game and that kind of stuff. So I think that
learn how to play with grown men.
Yeah, exactly. And like, he's a guy like he looks like he's got the profile where he looks like, despite not being, the tallest guy in the pitch, like he is very compact. He's been strong on the ball. He looks like a guy that can be strong on the ball. But, I think that it's still kind of like working some stuff out from him. Hey, but by the way, for a guy his height, he can do a pretty decent long throw. So take that, for what it's worth.
I kind of want to build on what you were saying about Andrew Gutman defensively. And this is something that has been, and this is a very specific point, so we don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but it's something that has been bothering me all year. And that is kind of the way Greg has been using the midfielders in the press, right? Which is he'll kind of run this almost like an overlap, right? Where Williams or Orahel, depending on where the ball is, will kind of shoot forward, press either the fullback or the center back, whoever's possessing it, as an effort to, let Hugo drop deeper and see if there's an opportunity for a counter. And so ultimately, right, like that's what led to the goal last night. If you go back, Sam Williams pushes, that's where that space opens up. Gutman gets dragged in by Owusu coming forward. That leaves Sealy unmarked on the back because Bamba doesn't get back and Williams doesn't get back. And so when we know we have a guy like Andrew Gutman, who is not, the top in terms of a one-on-one defender, doesn't have the best recovery speed. It's one of those things that obviously having a guy like Kellen Acosta back there, even Brian Gutierrez has showed a better defensive work rate this year, just a little bit more soccer IQ, right? We'll say, to know that you need to really recover and really get back there. That was a little frustrating to see, one of those things that's there to be taken opportunity of week in, week out, and we haven't made an adjustment to correct that, I guess.
Yeah, although the other thing that I do want to shout out on the play that led to the goal, it's Sam Rogers is supposed to be marking Prince Owusu, and he loses his mark. He just gets I don't know why. Like I really don't know why. Like he was just going forward a lot faster than Owusu was, and that was just like not the assignment at that point. He may have been playing out of the box a little bit more than he was comfortable with. He's never really able to recover, and he starts. I think that he realizes that there's additional options, kind of like on Montreal's left, so that'd be like Chris Brady's right coming down, and so he starts kind of going that way because I think it's Barroso is the only one on that side. But you can kind of see. I didn't. I don't know if he said anything, but Jack Elliott, I can remember him kind of like pointing at like the center part of the box, and I think he's kind of being like, Sam, like what are you doing? You need to be over here. And the fact that he loses that mark completely and is not able to do any kind of recovery is a big part of what made it so that Montreal were able to get that many numbers in the box and get the goal. On top of like losing his mark on the play that really went from like it just being like a completely harmless play to being a dangerous offensive play. If that's what happens when Owusu gets the ball because Rogers has let him a little bit loose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's multiple factors there, right? I guess there's I suppose there's never any one thing that leads to it, but that's certainly a huge part of it. Sam Rogers, who we've talked about a lot, I think has been improving, and unfortunately, maybe not quite the step in the correct direction we were hoping for last night.
Well, that's a good reminder, though, right?
Speaking,
yeah, like I think that like if we're trying to take bigger perspectives from this, I don't know if that's where you want to go with this conversation, but progress isn't linear. There's going to be guys that are not going to have the best game. What you need is for someone else to step up. And that isn't a thing that happened, right? Like, so like Bamba didn't have the best game. We didn't see like Sam Rogers having the best game, and partly because of the squad, partly just because of the game, like the lack of physicality, like nobody was able to really step it up.
Yeah, and I think it goes. Oh, sorry, John. I think just real quick, it goes back to this bit about the inexperience going on in the midfield. And with Barroso, we all mentioned these guys are Sam Williams 19, Sergio Orel 19, Barroso 19. Is there going to be that difference maker in a Kellen Acosta if Kwame was able to play, the full 90 to kind of solidify the midfield and get the attack, the support they needed, because the attack wasn't necessarily providing it for themselves? I think that's an interesting question looking back on the game. And, if we could replay the game with Acosta and Kwame and Sergio next to each other, maybe it's a slightly different result. But it's, of course, it's right? not the fault of the 19-year-olds.
Although, none of those, I don't know. I think we're still seeing exactly what Kwame is going to bring, especially when he's healthy. But if Guti was in the game, it wouldn't have added that extra physicality. I think Acosta certainly can. That's a club that he's got in his bag. And again, and it's also, I think the bigger point too with Rogers and a number of other guys is they're going to have off games because they're still young and learning. And that's just part of it. It was too much and too many guys having that happen all kind of at the same time in one match. But again, what I'm taking from it overall is how disappointed the team was to, be undefeated at home still, right? It felt like they were taking it more like a loss, and they were knowing that they were not doing what they could, which I think the positive you take from it is this is a team that expects to win games now.
I think it was, we talk about, a lot of vibe checks. I think this was a bit of a reality check, right? Not just for us as people who talk about it, as people who consume it, as people who enjoy it. I think it was a reality check for the team too, right? And possibly for Greg as well. I think there is a real aspect that I think we got all wrapped up in this 3-game winning streak. And it's not necessarily a sense of complacency, but it's just kind of, you forget, this is a guy who hasn't coached club soccer in 7 years. This is a group of guys who is, 70% have never played together before 2025. And there's going to be some learning. There's going to be some developing. There's going to be some understanding how to play against different systems. We've seen it twice now where you play these more physical teams, once with Kellen Acosta, once without, who's kind of, the physical linchpin of the team. Tim, you mentioned there, he's got that club in his bag. He's the guy who knows how to do that. And I think obviously missing Brian Gutierrez with that hurts a lot as well. Even if he's not quite as physical, he's just a very dynamic player. But just point to, it's a reality check, right? It's a reminder of what this team still has to do and what these players and coaching staff still has to learn about not only the league, but each other, really.
Yeah, and I think it's also bouncing off that. It's a good reminder that this league is very difficult to win in, especially with a team that's comprised of a lot of people who are new to the league. And it's also we have to remember that although Montreal was not getting the performances over the first 5 games, they were 0-4-1. They're playing their first 11 games on the road. That sucks. Their coach is
7,
fired.
I think, but yeah,
7.
Yeah,
but a large amount of games. This was a team that made the playoffs last year and has talent, and we saw that. And although it does feel like a loss, I think this is actually a really good moment for everyone involved in the club, including the fans, to humble us and prepare us for what is going to be a very difficult month in Chicago Fire soccer land.
Yeah, it's a good gut check going in, right? And now the challenge for Berhalter is going to be to keeping that confidence level up of we can go, we can show up at Soldier Field and face Inter Miami and still win if we really play our game and stick to our principles, but also realizing that you still have to do all this work. And I think that one important lesson, an issue the Fire had in previous seasons, was they didn't win games they should have won. We were talking a little bit before this about the San Jose Earthquakes game last July, which was just a completely forgettable. It wasn't, calling it a performance is almost exaggerating what happened on the pitch for the Fire in that 1-0 loss. And we saw the same thing against the New England Revolution in March last year, where it was raining a lot and stuff like that. But those are two teams that looked like they were going to fight for the support for the wooden spoon, geez, not the supporter shield. And that's where they ended up finishing. And the Fire, I think, were the better team in a lot of ways than both of those. And they just did not show up for those games. So you have to show up for those games and get the results in the games you want to win. Because the fact that the Fire still were able to beat last year, like the LA Galaxy and the New York Red Bulls, that's great. Like, that's awesome. Like that you beat the two teams that ended up making it to the MLS Cup final. You still have to win the games against opponents that you should be winning against. Otherwise, you're not going to get a chance to be in that playoff, right?
Yeah. And it gives you a great opportunity to learn too, right? Styles make fights, and the only way you can win the next one is by maybe losing the first, right? Learn a little bit so that you can improve for later on down the road. Matt, you said hopefully this doesn't come back to bite us. I mean, it's tough to look at 11 points in 6 games to start the year and say, gosh, I hope we don't need more later on. Like, that's a really strong start from what we may have expected, especially being, 4 of the first 6 on the road. And now you go away to New York, and then, that kind of kicks off this run of tough form. And I think unless we have some more to add, guys, I think this might be a good place to kind of wrap up and kind of keep us moving on.
Yeah, onwards, I think, is the message to take from this for the squad as well. Onwards, get ready for New York, and we'll be talking about New York later this week. So
yeah, I'm over this game. Moving on. I hope the boys do too, and it'll be a tough one against Harrison. They're coming off a loss, which is not good for us. I actually really wanted them to win this past weekend, but hopefully the boys go in there and give Emil Forsberg and Choupo-Moting some cash money, and we'll be talking about it later this week.
Yeah, hopefully we got the whole gang back together. But a couple things I'll point out. Obviously, if you weren't listening last week and you maybe missed an episode or so, we changed things up here on the Bonfire. So this was a little bit of our recap episode. We talked about the previous game and any pertinent news if we have any. And then we'll be back later this week on Thursday to preview Chicago Fire at New York Red Bull coming up this Saturday, of course, on Apple TV+. Very exciting times. We're looking forward to having you guys back in later in the week. The other thing to keep an eye out for, if you're listening to this, it'll probably be later today, actually, that we'll have our third episode of Hot Takes Live on the year. Myself, Matthew, Joe, and Chicago Fire's favorite Scotsman, Paul, will all be lining up to hear from you guys. And I'm sure the fan base is taking a draw at home incredibly well after a 3-game road winning streak.
For sure.
Yeah, I cannot wait to hear from everybody on that one. And of course, as always, stay tuned to the website so that you can see all the wonderful writings from Tim, from Alex, from Max as well. And you can stay informed and guided on all things Chicago Fire. You can also find it all over social media as well. But as always, thank you all so much for joining us here around the Bonfire. It was a pleasure to have you. We love talking ball with you and with everybody here. For Alan, Matt, and Tim, this is John signing off. Thanks again, and come on, you men in red.